The restaurant was called Oralia, and it sat on the main strip in Greenwich, Connecticut, tucked between a private wealth management firm and a boutique that sold very expensive handbags. It was the kind of place where senators ate lunch on weekdays and hedge fund managers brought their wives on anniversaries, where the lighting was always warm and golden and the servers were trained to move like shadows. Quiet, invisible, forgettable. Sharon Bellamy had been a shadow at Oralia for 11 months. She was 26 years old, black, 5'6", with box braids she kept pulled back in a neat low bun during her shifts and a smile she had trained herself to hold even when her feet were screaming and her back was on fire. She was good at her job. No, she was excellent at her job. 11 months and not a single complaint, not one returned plate, not one unhappy customer. She had memorized the wine list in her first week, learned to pronounce every French and Italian dish on the menu without hesitation by her second, and figured out how to read a table within 10 seconds of approaching it. This couple wants to be left alone. This man wants to be impressed. This woman wants to feel seen. Sharon saw everyone. That was her gift. She saw people, and she gave them exactly what they needed. And in return, they gave her 18 to 22% on their checks. And she went home to her tiny apartment in Stamford and did the math on her phone calculator and tried to make the numbers work for another month. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The lunch rush was winding down. Most of the dining room had cleared out, and the remaining tables were finishing dessert or lingering over coffee. Sharon was tired. She had closed the night before and opened this morning, which meant she had gotten maybe 4 hours of sleep in between, and her feet felt like they were wrapped in hot wire. But she kept moving because that's what she did. That's what she had always done. The private dining area near the back of the restaurant was separated from the main room by a frosted glass partition and a velvet curtain. It was reserved for guests who wanted privacy, which in Greenwich usually meant people who had enough money to buy privacy as a lifestyle. Sharon had served dozens of private dining parties in her 11 months. Tech founders, real estate moguls, a former cabinet member who tipped exactly 15% every single time. She treated them all the same way. Professional, warm, and gone before they remembered she existed. Today, the private dining area was occupied by 5 men, 4 Korean, 1 white. They had arrived 90 minutes ago in 2 black SUVs that pulled right up to the front entrance, which was something the valet usually didn't allow, but nobody said a word. The host had seated them personally. The manager had come out of his office to shake one of their hands. Sharon had noticed all of this from across the room, filed it away, and moved on with her shift. She had served them their appetizers. She had refilled their water. She had brought 2 bottles of a Japanese whiskey that cost $400 each. The men talked in a mix of Korean and English, and the one at the head of the arrangement, the one the manager had personally greeted, said very little. He mostly listened. Occasionally, he would say something short and quiet, and the other men would nod or adjust their posture or stop talking entirely. His name was Yangmin Park. Sharon didn't know that yet. She didn't know anything about him yet. What she saw was a man in his early 30s, Korean, tall, lean, with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He wore a dark suit that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body. His hair was black and pushed back off his forehead. He sat with a stillness that most people couldn't pull off. Not rigid, not tense, just still. Like he had decided exactly where every part of his body should be and placed it there with intention. He had looked at Sharon once when she brought the whiskey. A brief, flat glance. Nothing lingered. She was furniture to him. She was used to that. The lunch crowd thinned out even more. Sharon was clearing a plate from a 2-top near the window when the manager told her to check on the private dining group. See if they need anything else, and be quick about it. Don't hover. Sharon pushed through the curtain into the private area. The energy at the grouping of tables had shifted since her last visit. The conversation was looser. One of the men, the loudest one, the one sitting to Yang Min's left, had been drinking more than the others. He was thick-necked and broad-shouldered with a wide face and a gold watch that he kept adjusting on his wrist. His name, though Sharon didn't know this yet either, was Di Young. He was Yang Min's associate. He had been with the organization for 6 years, and he had the kind of confidence that comes from standing close to power for a long time without ever having to earn it himself. Sharon approached the tables to clear the empty plates. She said what she always said. "Can I get anything else for you gentlemen?" Polite, neutral, invisible. Di-young looked at her, not at her face, at her body, slowly, obviously. Then he reached out and grabbed her arm right above the wrist and pulled her toward him, not gently. His grip was hard enough that she felt his fingers press into her skin. "Yeah," he said, loud enough for the surrounding area to hear. "You can get a little closer." He said something else after that. Something crude. Something about her body that doesn't need to be repeated here because it was the kind of thing that men like Di-young say to women they consider beneath them. The kind of thing designed not to seduce, but to humiliate, to remind a woman that in this room, with these men, she was nothing more than a thing to be commented on. The other men at the tables shifted. One of them looked down at his drink. Another cleared his throat. The white associate stared at his phone. Nobody said a word. Sharon pulled her arm free. Her heart was hammering. Her face was hot. 11 months of perfect service, 11 months of swallowed frustrations and forced smiles and yes, sir, and of course, and right away. And this man had just grabbed her like she was something he found on the sidewalk. She looked at Yang Min. He was already looking at her. His dark eyes were fixed on her face, and his expression was completely, absolutely unreadable. He had seen everything. He had heard everything, and he was doing nothing. He lifted his glass of water, brought it to his lips, and drank. That silence, that deliberate, chosen silence, it hit Sharon harder than Di-young's grip, because Di-young was a dog, she could see that. He was loud and grabby and pathetic, and in any other context, she would have handled him with a sharp word and a turned back. But Yang Min was the man in charge. Every person at those tables deferred to him. Every movement in this room orbited around his gravity. If he had said one word, just one, Di-young would have released her immediately. She knew that. Everyone in this room knew that. And he chose not to. His silence was permission. His silence said, "She doesn't matter enough for me to speak." Something broke inside Sharon. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a scream or a cry. It was a quiet snap, like a thread pulled too tight for too long finally giving way. Every shift she had worked on no sleep. Every customer who had looked through her like glass. Every month of staring at numbers on her phone that never added up. Every time she had been touched or talked about like she was less than human. And she had smiled and taken it because she needed this job. She needed every job. She needed to keep going because people depended on her. She didn't think about what happened next. Her body moved before her brain could catch up. She stepped forward, pulled her hand back, and slapped Yang Min Park across the face. Not Di-young. Yang Min, the boss, the one in charge, the one who could have stopped it and didn't. The sound was sharp and clean, and it cracked across the private dining area like a whip. It carried past the partition into the main restaurant. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. A busboy near the kitchen doors froze with a tray of dirty glasses balanced on his shoulder. Di-young lunged forward from his chair. His face twisted with fury, and his hand moved toward the inside of his jacket. But Yang Min raised one hand, just barely, just a few inches off the surface of the table, and Di-young stopped, immediately, completely, like someone had pressed pause on him. Yang Min's face was turned to the side from the force of the slap. A red mark was blooming on his left cheek. Slowly, very slowly, he turned his head back toward Sharon. She was standing there with her hand still raised. Her chest heaving, her eyes wide. She was terrified. She could feel the terror flooding in now, right behind the anger, filling up the spaces the adrenaline was leaving behind. But she didn't step back. She didn't apologize. She held his gaze and she did not move. Yang Min looked at her. And this is the part that nobody in that restaurant could explain afterward. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't signal his men. He didn't even speak. He set his glass down on the table. He adjusted the cuff of his suit jacket. He stood, buttoned his jacket with one hand, and walked out of the private dining area, past the partition, through the main restaurant, and out the front door. He didn't look back. His men scrambled to follow, confused and tense and throwing sharp looks at Sharon as they passed. Di-young was the last to leave. He stopped next to Sharon, leaned close and whispered, "You're dead." Then he followed the others out. Sharon stood alone in the private dining area. Her hand was shaking. Her wrist still hurt from where Di-young had grabbed her. The restaurant was dead silent for maybe 5 seconds, and then the noise slowly returned, whispered and cautious, like everyone was trying to pretend they hadn't just witnessed what they'd witnessed. The manager appeared behind her. His face was white. "Do you have any idea what you just did? Do you have any idea who that man is?" Sharon didn't answer because she didn't know. 2 hours later, she was fired. The manager handed her a final check, $387.12, and didn't look her in the eye. She cleaned out her locker, which contained a spare pair of shoes and a granola bar, and walked out the back door into the parking lot. She sat in her car for 20 minutes before she could drive. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She had no idea that at that exact moment, in the back seat of a black SUV heading south on I-95 toward Manhattan, Yangmin Park was sitting in perfect silence while his men argued about what had just happened. Kai-T, his second-in-command, was on the phone making calls. Di-young was ranting about disrespect and consequences. The other associates were tense and quiet. Yangmin heard none of it. He was pressing 2 fingers to his left cheek where the heat of her palms still lingered, and he was thinking about the look in her eyes in that moment after the slap. Not fear, not regret, conviction. She had looked at him like he had failed a test he didn't know he was taking. No one had ever looked at him like that, not once in his entire life. Every person in Yangmin's world either feared him, needed him, or was trying to figure out how to use him. But this woman, this waitress who he didn't even know, she had looked at him with something that was rarer and more dangerous than any of those things. Disappointment. Like she had expected him to be better. Like she had looked at him and seen someone who should have done the right thing, and the fact that he didn't was worse than anything Di-young had done. That look was going to haunt him. He didn't know it yet, but it was going to change everything. Sharon's apartment was in Stamford, about 15 minutes south of Greenwich. It was a studio on the 3rd floor of a building that had been recently renovated, according to the listing, which in reality meant they had painted over the water stains and replaced the carpet with vinyl flooring that peeled at the corners. It was 480 square feet. The kitchen was 2 steps from the bed. The bathroom door didn't close all the way. The radiator either ran at full blast or not at all, and right now, in the middle of a Connecticut spring that couldn't decide if it was still winter, it was doing neither. Sharon sat on her bed with her phone in her hand, staring at the calculator app. She had the numbers memorized by now, but she ran them again anyway, because she kept hoping that one day the math would work out differently. It never did. Rent, $1,450. Overdue. 2 months behind. The landlord, a man named Gerald who owned 3 buildings in Stamford and communicated exclusively through letters slid under doors, had already given her the final notice. Electric, $87. Phone, $65. Student loan minimum payment, $312. She had a degree in communications from Central Connecticut State University. She had graduated 4 years ago believing that the degree would be a door. It turned out to be an anchor. Groceries. She usually budgeted $200 a month and ended up spending closer to $140 and eating a lot of rice and eggs. Then the 2 numbers that made everything else impossible. Every month, Sharon sent $400 to her mother, Denise, who lived in a subsidized apartment in Bridgeport. Denise had worked housekeeping at a hotel in Westport for 17 years until her knees gave out completely, and 2 surgeries hadn't fixed them. She was on disability now, but disability didn't cover her prescriptions, and her prescriptions were the reason she could get out of bed in the morning. Sharon had been sending that $400 since she was 23 years old, and she had never missed a month. And then there was Terrell, her little brother. 22, smart, stubborn, proud in a way that made Sharon want to grab him by the shoulders and shake him sometimes. He had gotten into UConn on a partial scholarship. Partial. That word carried the entire weight of their family's financial situation. Partial meant he was $14,000 short for next semester. He was working part-time at a warehouse in Waterbury to make up the difference, and Sharon had promised him she would help cover the rest. She didn't have the money. She didn't know where the money was going to come from, but she had promised, and in Sharon's world, you didn't break promises to family. You broke everything else first. Now she was unemployed. Her final check from Orlaia was $387.12. She had $743 in her checking account. That was it. That was the entire safety net between Sharon Bellamy and a freefall. She applied to 6 restaurants in 2 days. 2 in Stamford, 2 in Norwalk, 2 in Darien. She had a strong resume. She had references. She had 11 months at one of the most exclusive restaurants in Fairfield County with a perfect record up until the day she slapped a customer. 4 of the restaurants didn't call back. One sent a form email saying they would keep her resume on file, which was restaurant code for don't hold your breath. The last one, a French bistro in Darien, actually called her in for a meeting. The manager seemed interested right up until the moment he leaned back in his chair and said, almost casually, like he was asking about the weather, "You're not the girl who hit that guy at Orlaia, are you?" Sharon felt the floor drop out from under her. She tried to explain. She started to talk about what De Jong had done, about the grabbing, about the comment. The manager held up his hand and said he was sure there were 2 sides to the story, but unfortunately they weren't in a position to take on that kind of risk right now. He wished her the best of luck. He didn't shake her hand on the way out. Word had gotten around. The restaurant industry in Fairfield County was a small world, and gossip moved through it like wildfire through dry brush. The waitress who hit a guest. The waitress who assaulted a VIP customer. That's how the story was being told, without context, without the part where De Jong grabbed her, without the crude comment, without the part where the most powerful man at that table sat there and did nothing. Just the waitress who hit a guest. That was all anyone needed to hear. Sharon was being blacklisted, and she didn't even fully understand why, because she still didn't know who Yang Min Park actually was. That changed on a Thursday night. Jolene came over. Jolene Carter was Sharon's best friend. They had grown up 3 blocks apart in Bridgeport, survived the same public schools, and somewhere along the way had become the kind of friends who didn't need to knock before walking into each other's apartments. Jolene was a nail tech at a salon in Stamford. She was loud, honest, funny, and had absolutely zero patience for nonsense, which is why she and Sharon had been inseparable since the 8th grade. Jolene sat on Sharon's bed, eating Thai takeout from a container, and said, "Girl, look him up." "Look who up?" "The man you slapped, the guy from the restaurant." Sharon hadn't wanted to. Part of her didn't want to know. But Jolene pulled out her phone, typed for 30 seconds, and turned the screen around. The first result was a Forbes profile from 2 years ago. Park Yang-min, CEO of Park Holdings International. Luxury imports, commercial real estate, hospitality ventures. Estimated net worth. Unclear, but the article mentioned properties in Manhattan, Los Angeles, and Seoul, and a family empire that had been growing for 3 decades. The second result was a Reddit thread, then a blog post, then another. Then a pattern started emerging. The Park family, the Park syndicate, connections to underground gambling networks across the eastern seaboard, allegations of money laundering that had never resulted in charges, links to organized crime in South Korea and growing operations in the United States. Yang Min Park wasn't just wealthy. He was powerful in ways that didn't show up on tax returns. Sharon set the phone down. Her Thai food was getting cold. Her stomach had turned to ice. "I slapped him," she said quietly. Jolene looked at her. "Yeah, you did." "I slapped a crime boss, in front of his people, in a public restaurant." "Yep." Sharon stared at the ceiling. "I'm going to die." Jolene took another bite of pad Thai. "You might, but at least it was a good slap." Sharon didn't laugh. She wanted to, but the fear was too thick. She had made herself a target, and she hadn't even known what the target was painted on. What Sharon didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, was what was happening 28 miles south, in a glass and steel penthouse in Manhattan, overlooking the Hudson River. Yang Min Park was sitting at his desk. It was almost midnight. The penthouse was quiet. The view from his office windows showed the full sweep of the river and the lights of New Jersey beyond it, but he wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at his laptop screen. Kaiti had taken initiative after the restaurant incident. Kaiti was Yang Min's second-in-command, his most loyal and capable associate, the man who had been by his side since they were teenagers in Seoul. Kaiti had seen the slap as a public humiliation, an act of disrespect that required consequences. So without being asked, without telling Yang Min, he had made calls. He had reached out to every restaurant manager and hospitality contact he had in Fairfield County and explained, calmly and politely, that the young woman who had assaulted Mr. Park was not to be employed anywhere. Not a threat, just information. Kaiti was very good at conveying threats as information. When Yang Min found out, his reaction confused Kaiti completely. "Stop," Yang Min said. Kaiti frowned. "She embarrassed you in public, in front of associates, in front of strangers." "I said stop, undo it. Whatever calls you made, unmake them." "Yang Min." "Did I stutter?" Kaiti stared at him for a long moment, then bowed his head slightly and left the office. Yang Min turned back to his laptop. On the screen was everything he had been able to find about Sharon Bellamy: employment history, home address, education background, a photo from an old employee badge at a restaurant she had worked at before Oralia, grainy and slightly overexposed, showing a young woman with dark skin and sharp eyes and the kind of expression that said she was thinking something she wasn't saying. He had been staring at this screen on and off for 2 days. He told himself it was due diligence. Someone had publicly struck him, and he needed to understand who they were and whether they represented a threat. That was the logical explanation. That was the version he would give if anyone asked. But nobody asked, because nobody would dare. And alone in his office, in the honest dark of midnight, Yang Min could admit to himself that logic had nothing to do with it. He kept coming back to the moment right after the slap, not the slap itself, the moment after. The way she had stood there, shaking, terrified, and had not stepped back. The way she had looked at him not with fear but with something far more unsettling. She had looked at him like he was supposed to be better, like his silence in the face of what Di-young did was a choice, and she was judging him for it. She was right to judge him. That was the part that wouldn't leave him alone. She was completely, entirely right. Di-young had been out of line, and Yang Min had sat there and let it happen because intervening on behalf of a waitress would have been a display of softness in front of his associates, and in his world, softness was a crack in the wall that enemies could push through. But she hadn't seen a strategic calculation. She had seen a man who let another man grab a woman and did nothing, and she had slapped him for it, not Di-young, him, because she understood instinctively who held the power in that room. She understood hierarchy. She understood accountability. She understood him, at least that one piece of him, and that was more than most people ever managed. Yang Min closed the laptop, then he opened it again. He closed it. He opened it. He left it open and leaned back in his chair and pressed 2 fingers to his left cheek, where the faintest shadow of warmth still seemed to linger, though he knew that was impossible. This was a problem. 1 week after the slap, Sharon was sitting on her apartment floor doing math. Not on the calculator app this time. On paper. She had a yellow legal pad and a pen, and she was writing the numbers out longhand because somehow seeing them on paper made them feel more real, more solvable, even though they absolutely were not. She owed $2,900 in back rent. If she didn't pay by the end of the month, Gerald would start eviction proceedings. She owed $312 for her student loan payment. She owed $87 for electric. Her mother needed $400. Terrell's tuition gap was $14,000, and the deadline was in 6 weeks. She had $743 in her bank account and no job. She was trying to figure out if she could sell her car. It was a 2011 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles on it. Kelly Blue Book said it was worth about $4,500 if she sold it private party. That would cover the back rent and buy her another month or 2, but then she wouldn't have a car, and without a car in Stamford, Connecticut, she couldn't get to a job even if she found one. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers in Sharon's life usually meant debt collectors or spam, and she didn't have the emotional bandwidth for either. She answered anyway because she was desperate, and desperate people answer the phone. The voice on the other end was a woman's, professional, composed, precise. "Good morning. Am I speaking with Sharon Bellamy?" "Who is this?" "My name is Murray Yoon. I am the executive assistant to Mr. Yangmin Park. Mr. Park would like to offer you a meeting to discuss a professional opportunity. Would you be available tomorrow afternoon?" Sharon's blood went cold, then hot, then cold again. Her first instinct was to hang up. Her second instinct was to throw the phone across the room. Her third instinct, buried under the first two, quiet and insistent, whispered, "Listen." Jolene was sitting on the couch. She had been painting her own nails and pretending not to eavesdrop, but she had clearly heard everything because she was already mouthing, "Say yes," with wide eyes and aggressive hand gestures. Sharon said she would think about it. Murray Yoon gave her a time and an address and said she looked forward to hearing from her. The call ended. Jolene was across the room in 3 seconds. "You're going." "I am not going to a meeting with a crime boss." "You are absolutely going to a meeting with a crime boss. What's he going to do, Sharon? You already slapped the man. The worst part is over." "The worst part is not over. The worst part might be where I disappear and nobody ever finds my body." "Girl, if he wanted you gone, you'd already be gone. He's offering you a meeting. That means he wants something, and whatever it is, it's better than sitting on this floor doing math that doesn't math." Sharon hated that Jolene was right. She hated it deeply and specifically. But she looked down at the yellow legal pad with its columns of impossible numbers, and she picked up her phone, and she called Murray Yoon back, and she said yes. The meeting was in Manhattan, Koreatown, a private dining room above a restaurant that didn't have a sign on the door. Sharon took the Metro North from Stamford to Grand Central, which cost her $13.50 she couldn't afford, and walked crosstown to 32nd Street. She wore the best outfit she owned. Black slacks, a fitted blazer she had found at a consignment shop in Norwalk for $35, and a white blouse that was slightly too big but looked fine if she kept the blazer buttoned. She had done her braids fresh the night before, edges laid clean, and she had put on lipstick for the first time in weeks. She looked good. She was terrified. A man in a dark suit met her at the street-level entrance and led her upstairs. The private dining room was small, warm, and elegant. Low lighting, wooden walls, a single table set for two. Yang Min was already seated. He stood when she entered. That surprised her. Men in positions of power did not usually stand for waitresses from Stamford, Connecticut. He was wearing a dark navy suit today. No tie. His hair was the same, his face was the same. Calm, still unreadable. But there was something different in his eyes when he looked at her. Something she couldn't name. Like he was studying her, like he was trying to solve something. "Please sit," he said. She sat. A server brought tea. Sharon didn't touch hers. She sat with her hands in her lap, her back straight, and waited. Yang Min was direct. He didn't do small talk. He told her plainly that he was not angry about what had happened at Orlaya. He told her that Di-young had been dealt with, and he didn't elaborate on what that meant, and Sharon didn't ask. Then he leaned forward slightly and said something she didn't expect. "He was wrong to touch you, and I was wrong to allow it." Sharon blinked. She had prepared herself for a lot of possible openings to this conversation. An apology was not one of them. He continued. He told her about the Park Legacy Foundation. He was in the process of establishing a cultural and philanthropic organization designed to build the Park family's reputation in legitimate circles. Art exhibitions, scholarship programs for underprivileged students, community partnerships with schools and nonprofits in underserved areas. He needed someone to lead the community outreach arm of the foundation. Someone who understood those communities, not from a boardroom perspective but from lived experience. Someone who was smart, articulate, and not afraid to challenge the people around her. He paused. "You are clearly not afraid to challenge the people around you." The salary was $120,000 a year, full benefits, a car allowance, an apartment in Manhattan if she wanted it. Sharon heard the number, and for a moment the room tilted. $120,000. That was more than 3 times what she made at Oralia. That was her back rent, her student loans, her mother's prescriptions, and Terrell's tuition gap, all in one number. That was oxygen after 3 years of drowning. But she wasn't stupid. "Why me?" she asked. "Out of everyone you could hire, every person with a nonprofit background or a master's degree or connections, why the waitress who slapped you?" Yang Min looked at her for a long moment. The room was very quiet. She could hear the faint sounds of the restaurant below them, muffled through the floor. Someone laughing, dishes clinking. "Because everyone else in my life is afraid of me," he said. "You are the first person in a very long time who was not." Sharon didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She told him she needed to think about it, and he nodded like he expected that answer and respected it. He slid a business card across the table. She took it, stood, and left. Outside on 32nd Street, she leaned against a wall between a Korean bakery and a cell phone repair shop, and she breathed. Her hands were shaking, not from fear this time, from something she didn't have a name for. On the train back to Stamford, she stared out the window at the Connecticut coastline sliding past and turned the business card over and over in her fingers. When she got home, she noticed something. A black SUV parked across the street from her apartment building. It was tucked between a minivan and a work truck, easy to miss. But Sharon had seen it before, twice this week, maybe 3 times. She had assumed it belonged to someone in the neighborhood. Now she wasn't sure. She went inside, locked her door, and sat on her bed in the dark. Sharon took the job. She told herself it was about the money. She told Jolene the same thing, and Jolene tilted her head and gave her that look, the one that said, "Girl, I have known you since we were 13 and I can see through you like a window." "You could have found another serving job," Jolene said. "Maybe not in Greenwich, but in the city. You took this because you want to know more about him." "I took this because I need $120,000 a year." "You took this because you're curious." "I'm not curious." "You are curious as hell, and that's fine. Just don't pretend you're not." Sharon didn't respond, because responding would have required admitting that Jolene was, once again, annoyingly correct. Her first day at the Park Legacy Foundation was on a Monday in early April. The office was in a renovated brownstone on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, a 4-story building with exposed brick walls and tall windows, and the kind of tasteful modern furniture that looked like it came from a catalog where nothing had a visible price tag. The staff was small. 8 people, mostly Korean American, all polished and professional and welcoming in that careful, measured way that people are welcoming when they've been told to be. Murray Yoon, Yang Min's executive assistant who also served as the foundation's operations manager, was cool, efficient, and watchful. She showed Sharon her office, a small room on the 2nd floor with a window overlooking a tree-lined street, and handed her a welcome packet and a laptop and a company credit card. She explained the foundation's structure, its current programs, its donor base, and its goals. She was thorough and professional, and the entire time, Sharon had the distinct feeling of being cataloged. Like Murray was recording every word Sharon said and every expression that crossed her face for a report that would be filed somewhere later. Sharon got to work, and here's the thing about Sharon Bellamy that the people at the Park Legacy Foundation were about to discover. She was really, really good. Not in a flashy way, not in a way that announced itself, in a quiet, relentless, deeply competent way that came from years of figuring things out on her own because nobody was going to figure them out for her. She spent her first 3 days reading every document the foundation had ever produced, the grant applications, the scholarship criteria, the outreach plans, the donor communications. She read everything, and then she started making notes. The scholarship application process was a mess. It was 12 pages long, required 3 letters of recommendation, asked for a personal essay with a minimum word count of 2,000 words, and had a submission deadline that fell in the middle of finals week. It was designed, whether intentionally or not, for students who already had support systems, guidance counselors, and parents who knew how to navigate bureaucracy. It was not designed for first-generation college students from places like Bridgeport. Sharon redesigned it in her first week. She cut the application to 4 pages. She reduced the recommendation requirement to 1. She changed the essay prompt from "Describe your vision for contributing to global change" to "Tell us about a problem you've solved." She moved the deadline to 3 weeks after finals. She set up a phone hotline and an email address where applicants could ask questions and get answers from a real person. She also suggested partnering with public schools in the Bronx and Brooklyn, not just the private academies and prep schools in Westchester that the foundation had been courting. She drafted a proposal for an after-school mentorship program in 3 underserved neighborhoods and presented it at the staff meeting on her second Friday. The staff was impressed. Murray was impressed, though she would never say so out loud. And Yang Min, who came to the foundation office once or twice a week and sat in on occasional meetings, watched Sharon present her proposal with an expression that, if you knew how to read it, which almost nobody did, contained something very close to admiration. Their interactions were brief and professional. He would stop by her office, ask about a program, listen to her answer, nod, and leave. Sometimes the conversations went longer than they needed to. He would ask her about the schools she was visiting, and she would tell him, and he would ask follow-up questions that showed he had actually been listening, which was not something Sharon was accustomed to from people in positions of authority. She challenged him sometimes. She disagreed with his approach to donor relations, told him that hosting $500 a plate dinners in Manhattan penthouse venues was not the way to build trust with communities that distrusted wealth. He listened. He didn't always agree, but he listened. There was something building between them, and they both felt it, and neither of them named it. Meanwhile, Sharon started noticing things she wasn't supposed to notice. It started small. A financial report that listed a donation from a company she'd never heard of. She Googled the company and found a 1-page website with no employees listed and a P.O. box address in Delaware. Then another donation from a different company, this one registered in Nevada, also with no real online presence. Then a gala donor list that included 3 names she recognized from the Reddit threads she had read about the park syndicate. Men connected to gambling operations. Men connected to money laundering investigations that had gone nowhere. The foundation was real. Sharon believed that. The programs were real, the scholarships were real, the community impact was real. But the money underneath it was not clean. The foundation was built on top of something, and that something was the reason Yang Min Park could afford to be generous. She didn't confront him about it. Not yet. She wasn't ready, and she didn't know what she would say if she did. But she copied a handful of the suspicious files onto a flash drive and tucked it into the inside pocket of her purse. She didn't know what she was going to do with it. She just knew she wanted to have it. And then there was De-young. Yang Min had said De-young was dealt with, and what that meant, Sharon eventually learned, was that De-young had been demoted. Stripped of his position in Yang Min's inner circle, reassigned to lower-level operations. It was a humiliation, and De-young wore that humiliation on his face every time he showed up at the brownstone. He came to the office occasionally. Business reasons, meetings with Kite, logistics that required his presence. He never spoke to Sharon directly, but he watched her. He watched her cross the hallway. He watched her walk into Yang Min's office. He watched her leave at the end of the day, and the look on his face was something Sharon had seen before, on the faces of men who had been embarrassed and decided that the person who embarrassed them should pay for it. She told herself she could handle it. She had dealt with worse. But the way De-young looked at her made the hair on the back of her neck stand up every single time. One evening, late, Sharon was working alone at the office. Everyone else had left. She was finishing a grant proposal, and the brownstone was quiet except for the hum of the building's heating system and the distant sound of traffic on the street below. Yang Min walked in. She heard the front door, then his footsteps on the stairs, and then he was standing in the doorway of her office. He looked tired, more than tired. He looked like he had come from somewhere difficult, somewhere that had taken something out of him. The line of his jaw was tight, and he moved slightly differently than usual, like he was holding tension in his shoulders that he couldn't release. He didn't explain where he'd been. He sat in the chair across from her desk and asked about her brother. It caught her off guard. Not the question itself, but the way he asked it. Not like he was gathering intelligence. Not like he was checking a box. Like he actually wanted to know. So she told him. She told him about Terrell. About growing up in Bridgeport, where the sound of ambulance sirens was so constant that you stopped hearing it after a while. About her mother's knees, the surgeries, the disability checks that didn't cover what they were supposed to cover. About the $400 she sent home every month and the calculator app she opened every night before bed, running the same numbers, hoping they would come out different, knowing they wouldn't. Yang Min listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions or money or pity. He just listened, and when she finished, the room was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I know what it feels like to carry a family on your back. The weight doesn't go away. You just get stronger." It was the most human thing he had ever said to her. She felt the professional wall she had built between them shift. Not collapse, just shift. A crack formed, barely visible, and something warm came through it. She looked at him across the desk. This man who controlled an empire and had people who would do anything he asked without question, sitting in a chair in a quiet office at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, telling her he understood what it meant to carry weight. She believed him. That scared her more than Di-young ever could. 3 weeks in, and the tension was building on every front. Sharon could feel it in the office, in the way Murray's watchfulness had shifted from suspicion to something that looked like grudging respect. She could feel it in the Foundation's work, which was expanding faster than anyone had expected because Sharon's outreach was actually working. Schools were responding. Community organizations were signing on. Applications for the redesigned scholarship program were coming in at 3 times the rate of the previous year. And she could feel it between herself and Yang Min, though she tried very hard not to. They weren't dating. They weren't flirting, not in any way that could be identified and called out. But something was happening in the spaces between their professional interactions, in the way he found reasons to be at the brownstone on the days she was there, in the way she caught herself thinking about him on the Metro North ride home, replaying things he'd said, analyzing the way he'd looked at her when he said them, in the way their conversations kept going longer than they needed to, drifting from Foundation business into something more personal, more honest, more dangerous. Then came Beverly Hills. The Foundation was expanding to the West Coast. Yang Min had been laying groundwork for months, connecting with donors and cultural institutions in California, and now it was time for the first major event, a private cocktail evening at a contemporary art gallery in Beverly Hills. High-profile guests, major donors, media presence. Yang Min wanted Sharon there to represent the outreach program, to speak about the scholarship initiative, to be the human face of the Foundation's mission. It was her first time flying private. The jet was sleek and quiet, nothing like the cramped commercial flights Sharon had taken the handful of times she'd flown in her life. She sat across from Yang Min in a leather seat that probably cost more than her car and pretended to review a briefing document on her tablet while every cell in her body was aware of his presence 3 feet away. He was reading something on his phone. She watched him from behind her tablet. The way his jaw moved slightly when he was concentrating. The way his fingers held the phone, precise and deliberate, the way he did everything. She looked away before he could catch her. The Beverly Hills event was held in a gallery on Rodeo Drive, a white-walled space filled with contemporary Korean art and the kind of people who casually mentioned their houses in Aspen and their children's applications to Harvard. Sharon should have felt out of place. She was a girl from Bridgeport, Connecticut, standing in a room full of people whose annual charitable donations exceeded her lifetime earnings. But she didn't feel out of place. She felt like she belonged, and that realization surprised her more than anything else that had happened in the past month. She worked the room. She spoke with donors about the scholarship program, about the schools she was partnering with in the Bronx and Brooklyn, about the mentorship initiative she was building. She was clear, specific, passionate, and real. She didn't perform empathy. She didn't use jargon. She told the truth about what poverty looked like and what opportunity could do, and she told it from experience, and the people in that room leaned in and listened. Yang Min watched her from across the gallery. He had a glass of something in his hand that he never drank. He watched her move through conversations, watched her laugh, watched her listen, watched her make a billionaire's wife cry by describing a 14-year-old girl in the Bronx who had applied for the scholarship so she could be the first person in her family to finish high school. He watched, and the expression on his face was one that Kite, standing 3 feet behind him, recognized immediately. Kite had seen Yang Min negotiate with dangerous men without blinking. He had seen him face down threats and betrayals and federal investigations with the same steady, unshakable calm. But he had never seen Yang Min look at anyone the way he was looking at Sharon Bellamy across that gallery. It worried him. After the event, Yang Min walked Sharon to her hotel's suite. The hallway was long, quiet, and carpeted thick enough to swallow their footsteps. They stopped at her door. She turned to face him. The hallway was empty. The light was soft. He reached out and adjusted the collar of her blazer. It had been turned slightly inward, a small thing, barely visible. His fingers brushed the side of her neck as he straightened it. The touch lasted less than 2 seconds. Sharon stopped breathing. "You did well tonight," he said. She swallowed. "I always do well." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one, the ghost of one. Then he stepped back, nodded once, and walked away down the hall. Sharon went into her suite, closed the door, and leaned her back against it. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She was in trouble. Back in New York, things were getting darker. Di-young had been busy. His demotion had cut him off from Yang Min's inner circle, but not from the organization entirely, and he still had contacts, still had relationships, still had ears in rooms where important things were discussed. And he had been talking to someone outside the Park Syndicate. The Rhee family, a rival Korean crime network based out of Flushing, Queens. The Rhees had been competing with the Parks for territory and influence on the East Coast for over a decade. The current head of the family was Junho Rhee, a man in his late 30s who was ambitious, patient, and ruthless in a way that was different from Yang Min. Yang Min was strategic. Junho was opportunistic. He waited for cracks and then pried them open. Di-young was a crack. He had been feeding Junho information for weeks. Internal operations, business movements, security protocols, but the most valuable thing he gave Junho was a name. Sharon Bellamy, the woman who had Yang Min Park's attention. The woman who, according to Di-young, had made the most disciplined man in the Korean underworld lose focus. Junho was very interested in Sharon Bellamy, not because he cared about her, because he understood leverage. Sharon, meanwhile, came home from Beverly Hills and tried to return to normal. She went back to work at the foundation. She continued building the outreach programs. She sent money to her mother. She called Terrell and listened to him talk about his classes and his warehouse job and his dreams of working in tech after graduation. And then, late one night, she came home to her apartment in Stamford and found an envelope on her kitchen counter. She hadn't left an envelope on her kitchen counter. She was certain of that. She was certain because she had locked her door that morning, the way she always did, and she had checked it twice because ever since the black SUV started showing up across the street, she had been checking everything twice. She opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. It showed her mother, Denise, sitting on the bench outside her apartment building in Bridgeport. Denise was wearing her blue jacket, the one Sharon had bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. She was looking at something off camera. She didn't know she was being photographed. On the back of the photo, written in neat, careful handwriting, "He can't protect everyone." Sharon's knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the counter to keep from falling. Her hands were shaking so hard the photo slipped from her fingers and floated to the floor. She stared at it lying face up on the vinyl flooring, her mother's face looking back at her, and a terror unlike anything she had ever experienced filled her chest like ice water. They had been inside her apartment. They had been watching her mother. And whoever they were, they wanted her to know that the walls she thought she had were made of paper. Sharon walked into Yang Min's Manhattan office the next morning and placed the photograph on his desk. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight, and watched him pick it up. Yang Min looked at the photo. Then he turned it over and read the message on the back. Sharon watched his face change. It was subtle. Someone who didn't know him might have missed it entirely. But she saw the way his eyes went flat, the way the muscles along his jaw tightened, the way his hand gripped the edge of the desk with a controlled pressure that turned his knuckles white. This was what real anger looked like on Yangmin Park. Not heat, not explosion. Ice, the kind of cold that burns. He set the photo down and picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Kaiti. The second was to someone Sharon didn't recognize. Both conversations were in Korean, fast and clipped and intense. When he hung up, he looked at Sharon and said, "Your mother will have protection within the hour. No one will touch her." "Who did this?" "I'm going to find out." "That's not what I asked. Who did this?" Yang Min was quiet. Then he said, "I have an idea, but I need to confirm it before I act." He did confirm it. Kaiti came back within 48 hours with a name, Di-young, and behind Di-young, pulling the strings, Junho Ri. Kaiti laid it out in Yang Min's office with the door closed, and Sharon was not supposed to be there, but she was, because she had told Yang Min that if this involved her family, she had a right to hear it. He hadn't argued. The picture was clear. Di-young had betrayed the organization. He was feeding intelligence to the Ri family and had been for weeks. The photograph of Denise was a message from Junho, delivered through Di-young's access, designed to rattle Yang Min by threatening the person closest to him. Yang Min's fury was controlled but absolute. He dealt with the immediate security concerns first. Sharon's apartment was no longer safe, so he moved her temporarily to a secured residence in Stamford with a security detail. Her mother's building in Bridgeport got a rotating team of 2 men outside, 24 hours a day. Terrell's movements were tracked discreetly to make sure no one had approached him. Then Sharon did something Yang Min hadn't expected. She confronted him, not about the threat, about everything. "I've seen the files," she said. They were in his Manhattan office, late evening, the city glittering through the windows. She stood across from his desk, and she didn't sit down, because sitting down would have felt like surrendering some invisible ground she needed to hold. "What files?" he asked, though the slight shift in his posture told her he already knew. "The donor records, the shell companies, the payments to officials and judges and zoning boards. I know the foundation is connected to your organization. I know the money isn't clean. I need to understand what I'm standing in the middle of, or I walk out that door right now and I don't come back." The room was very quiet. Yang Min looked at her for a long time, and in that silence, something passed between them. A recognition. She wasn't bluffing. He knew she wasn't bluffing. And he knew that if he lied to her now, he would lose her, and losing her had become something he was not willing to do. So he told her the truth, not all of it. He was careful about what he shared and what he didn't, but he told her enough. He told her about his father, Park Sung-ho, who came to America in the late 1980s with almost nothing, and built an empire through a combination of legitimate business and underground operations. He told her about growing up split between 2 worlds, the polished public face that attended galas and charity events, and the private machinery that actually generated the family's wealth. He told her he had been working, genuinely, to transition the organization toward legitimacy, but that an operation this size didn't change direction overnight. The foundation was real. The programs were real. His intention to make the park name mean something other than fear was real. But the money that funded it came from places that didn't bear close inspection, and he wasn't going to insult her by pretending otherwise. Sharon listened. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she asked the question that was sitting in the center of her chest like a stone. "Do you hurt people?" He didn't flinch. "I have. I'm not going to lie to you about that." "Would you hurt me?" Something cracked in his expression, something raw and real and painful. He looked at her like she had reached inside his chest and grabbed something vital. "I would rather destroy everything I've built," he said. The room was so quiet Sharon could hear her own heartbeat. This was the moment the careful professional distance between them collapsed. Not with a kiss, not with a dramatic declaration, with honesty, with the most dangerous thing either of them had offered the other since the day she slapped him in a restaurant in Greenwich. Trust. She didn't leave. She stayed. And something between them shifted into new territory, uncharted and terrifying and impossible to walk back from. While this was happening, Junho Ri was making moves. He used Di-young's intelligence to poach two of Yang Min's key business partners, redirecting a supply chain worth millions. He was also laying groundwork for a bigger play, something that would hit Yang Min at his most vulnerable point. And now that Junho knew about Sharon, he had identified that vulnerable point exactly. But there was another piece, one that Sharon discovered almost by accident. Terrell called her, excited. He had received a job offer, a paid internship at a real estate development firm in San Jose, California. The pay was great, the company looked impressive, and the opportunity was exactly the kind of thing that could launch his career after graduation. Sharon was happy for him, genuinely, unconditionally happy, until she looked up the firm. It took 3 searches, 2 corporate registry checks, and a late night of digging through public records. But she found it. 3 layers deep, almost invisible. The firm was connected to a holding company that was connected to a trust that was controlled by the Ri family. They weren't just threatening her mother. They were trying to recruit her brother. And they were doing it with a smile. It all came apart on a Thursday. The first strike hit in the morning. A gossip blog, the kind that operated in the gray zone between journalism and rumor, published a story with the headline "Park Legacy Foundation Under Fire. Sources allege financial irregularities." The story was light on evidence but heavy on implication. It quoted anonymous insiders who described mismanagement, phantom donors, and a culture of secrecy. The quotes sounded like Di-young. They had his fingerprints all over them, the specific grievances, the tone of a man who felt he had been wronged and wanted the world to know it. Within 24 hours, 2 major donors pulled their commitments. A third requested a full audit before releasing their next round of funding. The foundation's board, a group of business leaders and philanthropists that Yang Min had carefully cultivated, called an emergency meeting. The scholarship program Sharon had built, the one that had already changed the trajectories of dozens of students, was in danger of losing its funding before the first checks were even mailed. Sharon was furious, not for herself, for the students, for the 14-year-old girl in the Bronx who had written in her application about wanting to be the first person in her family to graduate high school, for every applicant who had trusted this foundation with their story and their hope. Those were real people, and they were about to become collateral damage in a war between men they had never heard of. The second strike came that night. Sharon was staying at the secured residence in Stamford, but she had gone back to her old apartment to pick up clothes and personal items. When she arrived, the door was unlocked. Not broken, unlocked, like someone had a key. The apartment was mostly the same, but things were missing. Her laptop, the flash drive from her purse, and a framed photo of her mother and Terrell that had sat on her nightstand for 2 years. They hadn't taken anything valuable. They had taken things that mattered. It was a message, like the photograph of Denise, designed to crawl under her skin and nest there. Sharon called Yang Min. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. The third strike was the biggest. Junho Ri reached out to Yang Min through intermediaries and requested a meeting. A peace negotiation, he called it. A chance to discuss territories, boundaries, and coexistence. He proposed a neutral location, a private club in Palo Alto, California. Yang Min knew it was likely a trap, or at least a power play designed to make him look weak if he refused. In his world, declining a negotiation was a signal. It told everyone watching that you were either afraid or not in control. Yang Min was neither, and he couldn't afford to let anyone think otherwise. He told Sharon he was leaving for California. They were in his Manhattan office, and the late afternoon light was coming through the windows, and for a moment, the space between them felt fragile in a way it never had before, like something might break. "Be careful," she said. It was the first time she had said anything like that to him. It landed between them with a weight that neither of them acknowledged out loud. He looked at her. "I'll be back." "That's not what I asked." He nodded. "I'll be careful." He left Kaiti behind. Kaiti's job was to protect Sharon, that's all. That's the only thing. Yang Min was clear about this in a way that he was rarely clear about anything, Whatever happens, Sharon is safe. Kaiti understood. The Palo Alto meeting was what Yang Min expected it to be, not a negotiation, a performance. Junho Ri sat across from him in a private room at the club, flanked by two of his senior people, and laid out his terms with the casual confidence of a man who believed he was holding all the cards. He wanted Yang Min's West Coast expansion. He wanted the real estate holdings in Scottsdale and San Jose. He wanted a percentage of the East Coast revenue. In exchange, he would stop interfering with Yang Min's personal interests. The way he said personal interests, singular, pointed, looking Yang Min directly in the eye. Yang Min didn't react. He declined, quietly, absolutely, without raising his voice or changing his expression. He simply said no, stood up, and buttoned his jacket. Junho smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then I hope she's worth what comes next. Yang Min walked out. In the car, alone in the back seat, he called Kaiti. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, voicemail. He called again, voicemail. A 3rd time, voicemail. Cold settled into Yang Min's chest. Not fear, something deeper. Back in New York, while Yang Min was 3,000 miles away, Di-young had made his move. He showed up at the foundation office after hours. Sharon was working late. Kaiti was there, stationed in the front room, watching the security monitors. Di-young didn't come alone. He brought 3 men. They weren't Park Syndicate. They were Ri-soldiers, professionals, armed and calm and operating under specific instructions from Junho. Kaiti fought. He was strong and well-trained and completely fearless, but he was outnumbered 4-1. And by the time Sharon heard the commotion from her office and ran to the hallway, Kaiti was on the floor, bleeding from a cut above his eye, breathing hard. Di-young grabbed Sharon. She fought. She kicked and twisted and dug her nails into his forearm hard enough to draw blood. But one of the Ri-soldiers grabbed her other arm, and together they dragged her down the stairs and out the back door of the brownstone to a waiting van. Di-young took her phone. He looked at her in the back of the van and said, "Your leverage. Your boyfriend made the wrong call, and now he's going to learn what that costs." Sharon was terrified. Her heart was hammering so hard it felt like it was trying to escape her chest. But even in the back of that van, with zip ties on her wrists and Di-young's ugly face 6 inches from hers, her mind was working. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't begging. She was counting. Left turn, straight for about 10 minutes. Right turn, another right. Highway sounds, then exit, slower streets. Industrial noise, the smell of diesel and old concrete. She memorized every detail, because that's what survivors do. Kaiti, bleeding on the floor of the brownstone, dragged himself to the front desk. His phone was cracked, but it still worked. He called Yang Min. Yang Min answered on the first ring. Kaiti told him what happened, 3 words. They took Sharon. The silence on the other end of the line was the most terrifying thing Kaiti had ever heard. Not because Yang Min screamed, not because he cursed or threatened or broke something, because the silence was absolute, total. The kind of silence that comes right before everything changes. Yang Min said one sentence, "Find her." And every resource, every contact, every favor, every piece of infrastructure that Yang Min Park had built over a decade of power activated at once. Sharon was being held in a warehouse in an industrial corridor outside Newark, New Jersey. The space was cold and half-empty, the kind of building that gets leased for 3 months and abandoned for 6. Bare concrete floors, fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered, the smell of motor oil and damp cardboard. Di-young was packing. He was nervous, and Sharon could see it. He kept checking his phone, waiting for a call from Junho that wasn't coming. This was supposed to be simple. Grab the girl, use her as pressure. Force Yang Min to accept Junho's terms. But Junho hadn't called back in over an hour, and the reality of what Di-young had done was settling on him like a weight he hadn't expected. The 3 Ri-soldiers stood around the perimeter. They were calm and professional, but Sharon noticed the way they looked at Di-young. Not with respect, with tolerance. He was useful to them, a man who had betrayed his own boss and handed them access. But useful and trustworthy were two different things, and everyone in this room knew which one De-young was. Nobody in this warehouse trusted each other. Sharon saw that clearly, and she filed it away. Her wrists were zip-tied behind her back. She was sitting on a metal folding chair near the far wall. De-young had positioned her there and told her to stay quiet, which she had, because screaming would waste energy and she needed every bit of energy she had. She started talking. Not begging, not crying, talking, calm, steady. Direct. "You know how this ends, right?" she said to De-young. He stopped packing and looked at her. "Shut up. Junho's not calling you back because you've already served your purpose. You got him what he wanted. Access. Information, me. He doesn't need you anymore, De-young. You know how men like him treat people they don't need anymore." I said shut up. "You've been in this world long enough to know exactly what happens to the man who betrays his own boss. Yangmin demoted you, yeah. That hurt. I get it. But you were still alive. You still had a place. What do you think Junho is going to give you? A promotion? A seat at his table? You're a traitor, De-young. Nobody trusts a traitor. Not even the people the traitor helps." De-young's jaw tightened. He wanted to hit her. She could see it in his hands, the way they curled into fists and then uncurled. But he didn't, because some part of him, the part that was still thinking clearly underneath the fear and the pride and the desperation, knew she was right. One of the Ree soldiers said something in Korean. Short, dismissive. De-young snapped back at him. The soldier shrugged and turned away. The tension in the room thickened. Sharon had been working on her zip ties since the moment they put her in the chair. Terrell had shown her a video once, years ago, some survival channel on YouTube where a guy demonstrated how to break zip ties by creating slack and twisting at the right angle. She had laughed at the time and called him paranoid. She wasn't laughing now. She twisted her wrists slowly, carefully, creating millimeters of space that nobody noticed because nobody was watching her hands. They were watching each other. She got one hand free. She kept both hands behind her back and didn't move. Yangmin's operation was closing in. Kite, despite his injuries, had managed to pull cell tower data from his own phone that recorded the direction of the van when it left the brownstone. Yangmin's people cross-referenced that with traffic cameras and surveillance footage from 3 different sources. A contact inside the Ree organization, someone Kite had been cultivating for months as an insurance policy, confirmed a warehouse location in Newark. Yangmin landed in New Jersey on a private flight from California. He didn't go home. He didn't change clothes. He went straight to the staging point where his team was assembled. 6 men, armed, ready. Yangmin looked at them and gave instructions that were specific and calm and left no room for interpretation. No one was to be permanently harmed unless absolutely necessary. He wanted Sharon out alive and uninjured. Everything else was secondary. They moved on the warehouse just after midnight. The first thing that happened was the lights went out. Yangmin's team cut the external power line. The warehouse plunged into darkness. The fluorescent buzz died. The Ree soldiers reached for their weapons. De-young cursed and stumbled backward. Sharon moved. She grabbed the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall 2 feet to her left. She had clocked it hours ago, the moment they brought her in, the way she clocked everything, because Sharon Bellamy had spent her whole life paying attention to details that other people ignored. She pulled the pin, aimed, and sprayed directly into the face of the nearest Ree soldier. White chemical foam exploded across his eyes and nose and mouth. He staggered, blind, choking. The second soldier spun toward her, but she was already moving. She swung the canister hard and caught De-young across the shoulder. He went down with a grunt. She didn't stop. She ran for the side door, hit it with her shoulder, and burst through into the cold night air. She ran. And she ran directly into Yangmin. He was 10 feet from the door, moving toward it, his team fanning out behind him. She came through the door at full speed and crashed into his chest, and his arms came around her instinctively, catching her, holding her, steadying her. She was shaking. Her wrists were raw and bleeding where the zip tie had cut into her skin. Her chest was heaving. She smelled like fire extinguisher chemicals and sweat and fear. He held her, and he said her name, just her name. Sharon! And the way he said it, the way his voice cracked on the second syllable, the way his arms tightened around her like he was trying to hold together something that had almost broken, told her everything she needed to know about what the last few hours had cost him. "I got out," she said into his chest. "I got myself out." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. Her eyes were red. Her braids were half undone. There was a smear of something on her cheek. She was the most incredible thing he had ever seen. "I know you did," he said. His team secured the warehouse. De-Young was captured, zip-tied with the same kind of ties he'd used on Sharon, which felt like justice in its smallest and most satisfying form. The Ree soldiers were disarmed and sent back to Flushing with a message for Jun-ho that didn't need words to be understood. Yang Min took Sharon to a private residence in Alpine, New Jersey. A quiet house on a tree-lined street in one of the wealthiest zip codes in America. A doctor came and treated her wrists and checked her over and gave her something mild to help her sleep. Before she slept, she looked at Yang Min. He was sitting in a chair next to the bed, and he hadn't moved since they arrived, and she could see in his face that he was not going to move until he was certain she was safe. "I don't need you to save me," she said, "but I want you beside me. There's a difference." He looked at her. "I know the difference. That's why I'm here." She closed her eyes. His hand found hers on the blanket. She let him hold it. She slept. 6 months later, Jun-ho Ree's empire was gone. Not destroyed by violence, not dismantled by force, dismantled by strategy, by patience, and by the precise, devastating use of information. Yang Min used everything. The intelligence gathered from De-Young's capture, the communications recovered from the Ree soldiers' phones, the financial records that Kite-T's inside contact had been quietly copying for months. He assembled a package, comprehensive and airtight and devastating, and he delivered it anonymously to federal investigators through a chain of intermediaries so clean that it could never be traced back to him. The FBI opened a multi-agency investigation into the Ree family's operations: money laundering, wire fraud, racketeering, tax evasion. The indictments came down like dominoes. Jun-ho Ree was arrested at his home in Great Neck, Long Island on a Tuesday morning. His assets were frozen, his associates scattered. His organization, which had taken 20 years to build, collapsed in less than 3 months. De-Young was turned over to authorities separately, through a different channel. He was charged as a cooperating witness, which meant he avoided prison but lost everything else. His name, his reputation, his place in any organization. He became a ghost. The last anyone heard, he was living under a different name in a different state, working a job that required no one to know who he used to be. Yang Min didn't pull the trigger on any of it. He let the system do the work. And the reason he chose that path, the legal path, the path that required patience instead of force, was standing next to him on the rooftop terrace of his Manhattan penthouse on a warm October evening, wearing a dress she had bought with her own money and holding a glass of wine she had picked out herself. Sharon Bellamy had transformed the Park Legacy Foundation into something real. Not the version of real that Yang Min had originally intended, the polished facade designed to launder a reputation. Actually real. Under her leadership, the foundation had funded 47 full-ride scholarships for first-generation college students across New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. The outreach programs she designed were operating in 12 public schools. 3 major nonprofit organizations had signed partnership agreements. A profile in the New York Times had called her the most compelling voice in corporate philanthropy under 30. The foundation was no longer a front. It was the future. And Yang Min had been quietly restructuring his entire organization around it, divesting from illegal operations, reinvesting in legitimate businesses, using the blueprint Sharon had created as the model for what the park name could become. It wasn't finished. It wouldn't be finished for years. But the direction was set, and for the first time in his life, Yang Min Park was building something he was proud of. Terrell never took the internship in San Jose. Sharon had told him the truth, not all of it, but enough. Enough for him to understand that the opportunity wasn't what it seemed, and enough for him to trust his sister's judgment the way he always had. He finished his degree at UConn. He graduated in May, and Sharon sat in the audience and cried in a way she hadn't cried in years. The good kind. The kind that comes from watching someone you love cross a finish line you helped them reach. He had a legitimate internship lined up at a tech company in Stamford for the summer, and he was going to be fine. He was going to be more than fine. Denise was safe. Sharon had moved her out of Bridgeport to a comfortable apartment in West Hartford, in a quiet neighborhood with a park nearby where she could sit on warm days and read the mystery novels she loved. Her medical care was covered. Her prescriptions were covered. She didn't know the full story of how her daughter's life had changed so dramatically, but she knew Sharon was happy, and for Denise, that was enough. Jolene got a $50,000 small business loan through the Foundation's new entrepreneur program and opened her own nail salon in Stamford. She called it Slap and Shine, which Sharon told her was ridiculous, and Jolene told her was branding genius. The salon was booked solid within 3 months. Jolene told everyone who sat in her chair that her best friend slapped her way to the top, and honestly, she wasn't wrong. Kaiti recovered from his injuries fully. He had a scar above his left eyebrow that he refused to get treated because he said it made him look seasoned. He respected Sharon now, genuinely and without reservation, not because Yang Min told him to, but because she had earned it. One evening, when they were alone in the brownstone office, Kaiti said to her quietly, "You are the best thing that ever happened to him. Don't tell him I said that." Sharon smiled and said, "Your secret is safe." It wasn't. She told Yang Min that same night. He pretended to be surprised. The final scene. Sharon and Yang Min were at dinner. Not a private dining room in a place that didn't appear on Google Maps. Not a gallery event in Beverly Hills. A small Korean restaurant in Manhattan, tucked on a side street in Koreatown. The kind of place with plastic-covered menus and banchan that came in little metal dishes, and an owner who had known Yang Min since he was 19 years old and still called him Kid. They were together now, not in a flashy, public way. In a steady, certain, permanent way. The kind of relationship that had been forged in fire and tested by people who wanted to destroy it and survived because both people in it refused to let go. Yang Min reached across the table and took her hand. She let him. She always let him now, not because he took, because she chose to give. "You know," he said, "I never thanked you." She raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For the slap." She laughed, a real laugh, full and warm and free, the kind that made the owner look over from behind the counter and smile. "You're welcome." "I mean it," he said. "You woke me up. I was sitting in that restaurant, surrounded by people who feared me, and I thought that was power. I thought silence was strength. You showed me it wasn't. You showed me that the most powerful thing a person can do is tell the truth, even when it costs them everything." Sharon looked at him. This man who could have destroyed her and chose to stand beside her instead. This man who had let her change him, not because she demanded it, but because she showed him something worth changing for. "You weren't asleep," she said. "You were waiting. You just needed someone to be honest with you." He squeezed her hand. "I love you. I don't say that to make a moment. I say it because it's the truest thing I've ever said." Sharon looked at their hands on the table. His and hers. Two people from completely different worlds who had found each other through a slap, a silence, and the stubborn refusal to be anything other than exactly who they were. "I love you too," she said, "and I'd slap you again if I had to." He smiled, a real smile, wide and unguarded and completely free. The kind of smile his associates had never seen. The kind of smile that belonged only to her. The owner brought them an extra dish of kimchi without being asked. Outside, the city hummed and glowed and kept moving, the way cities do. Inside, two people sat across from each other in a small restaurant and held hands and ate good food and didn't need the world to be watching. Sharon Bellamy walked into a restaurant in Greenwich, Connecticut, as a waitress with $743 in her bank account and nothing to lose. She walked out having changed the trajectory of one of the most powerful men on the East Coast. She didn't do it with manipulation. She didn't do it with fear. She did it with the only thing that nobody in Yang Min's world had ever offered him. The truth. Sometimes that's all it takes. One moment of honest, reckless, fearless truth to change absolutely everything. If this story hit you somewhere real, drop a comment and tell me what moment got you. Was it the slap? Was it the warehouse? Was it the ending? I want to know. And if you made it all the way to the end of this video, you already know this channel is for you. Hit that like button. Subscribe, turn on notifications. Because the next story is already coming, and trust me, it's even crazier than this one.